Today, one of the biggest obsessions of popular culture is espionage. While the whole world is arguing over who the new James Bond will be, we are traveling back to the earliest days of spying. To an age ruled not by technology, but by pure intelligence, and by merchants of information. In that era, being a spy did not mean wearing a sharp suit and sipping a martini. Sometimes it meant gathering gossip in a crowded harbor tavern. Sometimes it meant selling a ship's worth of secrets, like a shipment of valuable goods. In the Ottoman Empire, spies were not professionals graduating from specialized schools, as we imagine today. They were, in truth, traders of knowledge, merchants sailing from one port to another, prisoners released and sent back to their homelands, even palace physicians moving freely through corridors of power. In those days, information was the most expensive commodity of all. The one who held the right piece of information could end a war before it even began, or protect their seat in the palace. The greatest weapon of this invisible army was the ordinary life they used as a disguise. But among these ordinary people, who were the most dangerous? Who were those shadowy groups listening to the enemy's breath along the borderlands, their loyalty sometimes tested even by changing their religion? Now we turn to them, to the Martolos and the Voynuks. Let us take a closer look at these mysterious figures who walked the thin line between faith, loyalty, and survival. Imagine sitting in a fortress, yet you know how many horses the enemy has hundreds of kilometers away. You even know why their commander woke up in a bad mood that very morning. This is not magic. It is the result of a perfectly functioning system, known as taking a tongue. In the Ottoman Balkans, the most strategic unit was the Martolos. What made them so remarkable was that almost all of them were chosen from the local Christian population. They were like a living radar. Their main duty was what the military called taking a tongue. To take a tongue meant to cross into enemy lines, capture an officer or an important figure alive, and force him to speak, so that the enemy's secret plans could be learned from his own tongue. From that moment on, that captured soldier became the army's freshest source of intelligence. He was now a living tongue. While the Martolos stood guard along the borders like fixed radar stations, the Voynuks were the moving eyes of the army. These Christian units of Balkan origin officially looked like simple support troops, responsible for caring for the army's horses and inspecting the roads. But in reality, they were reconnaissance units who knew the mountain paths and the hidden passes better than anyone. If the Martolos were the silent watchers of the frontier, the Voynuks were the trackers of the mountains. These spies were so valuable that Istanbul sometimes summoned them to the capital from hundreds of kilometers away just to hear them in person. Written reports could lie. Ink on paper could be manipulated. But to look a spy in the eyes and question that tongue face to face, that was the most reliable method of all. Yet at this point, a troubling question appeared. These people spoke the same language as the enemy. They came from the same lands and the same roots. So who were they truly loyal to? Here begins the world we call tangly loyalty, a realm of twisted, overlapping allegiances. Historical records are full of such examples. Families like the Brutti, one brother a cardinal in Rome, another a knight in Malta, and the third serving in Istanbul as an imperial interpreter. For people like this, loyalty did not belong to a single faith or a single flag. Loyalty followed one thing only: who would pay the highest price for their information. But this tangled loyalty and these border games were only one side of the story. The most insidious, the most dangerous form of intelligence sometimes slips straight into the palace itself, into the very heart of power. Now we enter those dark corridors, where espionage became a weapon of domestic politics. We move into the hidden war between Sokollu Mehmed Pasha and Lala Mustafa Pasha, a struggle fought not with swords, but with secrets. Whose tongue would prove deadliest? Long before armies met at the gates of Vienna, wars were won or lost in the narrow corridors of the palace. For Sokollu Mehmed Pasha, one of the most powerful Grand Viziers of the Ottoman Empire, the greatest rival was not the Archduke of Austria, but the man standing right beside him, Lala Mustafa Pasha. The story begins with the debate over the conquest of Cyprus. Sultan Selim II wanted to seize the island of Cyprus, and he planned to appoint Lala Mustafa Pasha as commander of the expedition. But Sokollu Mehmed Pasha fiercely opposed this campaign. His official reason was the wish to preserve peace with Venice, yet the real reason lay elsewhere. If Cyprus were conquered, Lala Mustafa Pasha would gain immense prestige, enough to shake Sokollu's own seat of power. To stop this conquest, Sokollu played one of the riskiest games in history. He activated his own private intelligence network, his faction spies. Through his personal physician, Salomon Ashkenazi, he began leaking secret information to the Venetian ambassador. His aim was clear: to warn Venice in advance, to help them strengthen their defenses, and to make the conquest of Cyprus as difficult as possible, so that Lala Mustafa would fail and Sokollu's position would remain unshaken. Here, espionage was no longer just a state duty. It had become an instrument of internal politics, a covert weapon used to eliminate rivals. But events did not unfold as Sokollu had planned. Despite all obstacles, despite every act of sabotage, Lala Mustafa Pasha succeeded. In 1571, Cyprus fell to the Ottomans. Sokollu's plan had backfired. Yet even this defeat, he managed to turn into a political victory. Soon after the conquest of Cyprus, the Ottoman fleet was annihilated at the Battle of Lepanto. In the face of this disaster, Sokollu delivered his famous response: "By taking Cyprus, we cut off your arm. By burning our fleet, you have only shaved our beard." The relentless war of wits in these palace corridors was more than a personal rivalry. It was a rehearsal for the strategy the Ottoman Empire would follow not only on land, but across the vast seas. Sokollu's metaphor of the arm and beard pointed to a much larger reckoning, to the waters where the true struggle would unfold, the depths of the Mediterranean. Now we turn to the real players on this grand maritime chessboard, and to the mastermind behind the great act of sabotage that would change the course of history. In the 16th century Mediterranean, to be an admiral was not only to be a skilled sailor, it was to be a master of blackmail and sabotage. Sinking a ship was a victory, but blowing up the enemy's main arsenal right in the heart of their power, that was the kind of espionage that could change the course of history. Behind these shadowy operations stood one of the most mysterious figures of the age, Yasef Nasi, also known as the Duke of Naxos. A Jewish banker of Portuguese origin, Nasi escaped the persecutions of Europe's Inquisition and took refuge in the Ottoman Empire. He rose to become one of the closest advisors of Sultan Selim II. His vast commercial networks across Europe were, in reality, one of the world's most extensive intelligence systems. It was Nasi who strongly pushed for the conquest of Cyprus and helped persuade the Sultan to move against Venice. But there was a problem: the Venetian fleet. At the heart of Venice stood the Arsenale, great state shipyard and military complex, one of the largest naval facilities of its time. Then, in September 1569, something extraordinary happened. The Venetian Arsenal was rocked by a massive explosion. Its armory was reduced to ashes. This was no accident. Many historians point to Yasef Nasi's agents, who are believed to have infiltrated the shipyard and blown up the gunpowder magazines from within. The sabotage was so devastating that the Venetian navy was left paralyzed. So when the Ottomans landed on Cyprus the following year, Venice was in no position to strike back with full force. Yet intelligence and military power were not used only for sabotage. Sometimes, the immense resources of the empire became a bargaining chip to fulfill the most personal, human desires of its highest officials. One of the most striking examples is Segalazade Yusuf Sinan Pasha. Born into a Sicilian aristocratic family, his father held the title of Visconti, an aristocrat who sailed his own ships in the Mediterranean, conducting corso, state-sanctioned privateering on behalf of the crown. The son, Segalazade, was raised in the Ottoman Enderun Palace School and rose to the rank of Pasha. When he sailed with a massive Ottoman fleet of around 100 ships towards the coasts of Sicily, all of Europe panicked. They believed a grand invasion was about to begin. But behind this movement, filed in official reports as preparations for conquest, lay a completely different plan. Segalazade sent a message to the governor of Sicily, then under the rule of the Spanish Empire. His demand was simple and deeply personal. If he was not allowed to see his mother, he would burn and devastate the island. Faced with this overwhelming display of naval power, the Spanish authorities tried to stall. They demanded hostages as a guarantee. Segalazade refused. "I am an aristocrat whose word is his honor," he replied. In the end, under the shadow of that great Ottoman fleet, Segalazade finally embraced his mother. For a brief meeting that lasted barely 15 minutes, he had used the intelligence and military power of an empire as a shield strong enough to shake an entire continent. But such grand acts of sabotage, such personal odysseys under the cover of war, were only possible because information was hidden with almost perfect precision. The secret was not only what was known, but how that knowledge was carried. A single message could decide the fate of a fleet. A single letter could ignite or avert a war. Now, we step into the most intimate and ingenious realm of Ottoman intelligence, into a world of invisible inks and unbreakable codes, where words were written to be seen by no one and understood by only a few. Could a tiny tail on the letter A inside a letter mean there are 35 ships in the enemy fleet? In the Ottoman world, encryption was sometimes hidden inside the very style of writing itself. Within the Ottoman bureaucracy, the script known as Siyakat was developed not only to keep the empire's financial records, but also to protect those records from foreign eyes. Siyakat was a closed-circuit writing system. Its most important feature was that it was almost entirely without dots or diacritical marks, and its words were chained together at high speed, almost like shorthand. For anyone untrained, Siyakat was impossible to read. It became a natural shield of encryption for the Ottoman treasury and for land registry records. A kind of professional secret known and mastered only by select scribes of the state. But spies did not stop at this kind of bureaucratic cryptography. They went further into the physical world, creating far more ingenious methods. Letters written with lemon juice were among the most popular techniques. Lemon juice is an organic acid. When used as ink on paper, it dries completely invisible, leaving the sheet looking like a blank page. Unlike a coded alphabet, the goal here is not to hide the content of the message, but to hide the very existence of the message itself. To reveal it, the reader must hold the paper close to a candle flame or a bed of hot coals. The carbon compounds in the lemon juice burn faster than the paper, turning dark, and suddenly, the hidden words emerge in brown letters across the page. Secret notes hidden in the heels of shoes and confidential reports that always began with a specific code of honor, for example, the word onorando, were all part of this physical art of concealment. But as the global storm of the early 20th century gathered force, these individual strokes of genius and personal secret correspondences were no longer enough. The speed of information increased. The scale of operations expanded, and the old world of spies in the shadows had to give way to something new. States were now compelled to organize intelligence as an official mind of the nation. The ancient traditions of espionage would evolve into the first modern, fully structured intelligence agencies. Now we move to the empire's last and most professional fortress, to the birth of Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, the special organization, a clandestine force for a world at war. As the world stepped into the modern age, the great powers began to build their own shadow armies. In 1909, Britain created what would become MI6, its Foreign Intelligence Service. Around the same time, in 1908, the United States laid the foundations of what would later evolve into the FBI. The Ottoman Empire, with centuries of experience in the art of espionage, brought its own shadow tradition under a single roof in 1913. Under the leadership of Enver Pasha and Kuşçubaşı Eşref, Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa was born, the special organization. It was the modern summit of that ancient Ottoman spying heritage. Counted among the first official intelligence services of the world, this organization did far more than just collect information. From the deserts of Tripolitania to the borderlands of India, it carried out daring operations, turning asymmetric warfare into a refined art. In truth, this network was the technological heir of those long-ago Martolos who walked the funds, Balkan mountains, and of the palace doctors who once hid letters inside the heels of their shoes. Imagine this. While British intelligence was still in its infancy, Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa was already at work across the Middle East, organizing local populations, stirring resistance, and carrying out impossible acts of sabotage deep behind enemy lines. The modern world of intelligence still stands on the foundations laid by this bold and ancient legacy. In every secret mission, in every covert operation today, there is still an echo of those first shadow armies, and of an empire that learned long ago that information itself is the sharpest blade in the arsenal of power. History is sometimes written on a fragile piece of paper, and sometimes in the arms of a weeping mother on the shores of Sicily. The Ottoman Empire's invisible army protected the heart and borders of the empire for nearly 600 years. They were never as famous as James Bond. Their names were rarely carved even onto their own tombstones. And yet, if we can still feel a connection to them today through these stories, that alone is the strongest proof that they truly accomplished something. So what do you think was the greatest espionage success in Ottoman history? A palace intrigue? Or a daring act of sabotage inside a naval arsenal? Let's meet in the comments and continue the conversation there. Don't forget to subscribe to Ottoman Files and like this video to support more stories from the shadows of history. See you in the next file.